name is Daniel. I've been with White Shirt Media for about 11 or 12 years or so quite a bit of lifetime, and been managing pay-per-click campaigns for our clients, for our business for a very long time. I've seen the ins and outs of Google and other platforms and how things have evolved, and we're here to talk about demand gen and PMax and how these two campaigns can be a good fit or a bad fit depending on the objectives that you have. And so we'll talk a little bit about the differences, how we got here, and a couple of practical tips from our experience that you guys can hopefully leverage in your day-to-day as account manager. So we have with us today Brent. Brent, tell us a little bit about yourself and before we go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, awesome. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm definitely really excited to be here, especially going over a lot of what we're going over today. It's perfect embodiment of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So my name's Brent Neale. I work at Walker Hill Digital right here. One of the digital performance managers specializing in Google Ads. I've been in marketing for coming around 4 years now, and then about another 6 years before that in sales. So a lot of my sort of experience just comes around a lot of buyer psychology, what makes people tick. And now that's kind of transitioned towards more advanced marketing.
That's really cool. So you're my go-to guy for ad copy. If I need to get into the minds of somebody and be able to get that, you must be a wizard on the headlines and descriptions, eh?
Yeah, look, it depends on the day and how many copies you've gone through. But yeah, definitely look, ad copy is definitely one of the areas that I like to specialize in. And now having demand gen and more performance max with Google Ads, it just means I can express that a bit more too.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. And so why don't we go ahead and jump right in? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so pretty much as we discussed, the objective today is to be able to talk over PMax and demand gen, go over how do we get to PMax, how do we get to demand gen, what campaign types does these evolve from, what are some of the differentiators, and then be able to contrast PMax versus demand gen, how the mechanisms work for each of these, how they can target buyers or prospective buyers in this case, and what could be a better fit depending on, again, each marketing objective that you may have with either your business or the businesses of your customers. We'll talk about what you can expect in the future for both of these campaign types, how tracking might continue to change, how you want to approach analysis of data, and then again some of the case studies and success stories that we've been able to see, and how we were able to go from a specific place into a much better place from a performance standpoint. So I think we can go ahead and jump right into the next slide.
Transition.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about how this came about. So Performance Max, really, if you want to think about it from a certain standpoint, is Google's approach to being able to get as much inventory as possible, right? That's essentially the name of the game. And so we're coming from, the easiest way to see it is coming from shopping and local campaigns. And so obviously PMax does have the ability to put in a product inventory and things like that. But essentially what we're trying to see is you can think of PMax as Google's all-in-one campaign. That's essentially what it is. So if you're an advertiser just getting started and you don't really know where to start, this is a low entry level complexity to be able to launch a campaign and get moving right away. You also have the ability to, with one campaign, target everything Google, right? So you could be on search, you could be on the display network, you want to be on YouTube, sure, just add some video assets and you'll be there. You want to be on the Discovery feed, you can be there too. So this is your way to just very, very quickly with low effort get across the board. It does come with some caveats because it can't all be perfect, but that's essentially the name of the game, and that's how you get there. And so does that sound along the lines of what you've seen, Brent? That in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that Google's done a really good job with the Performance Max campaign, because the way I've always seen Google Ads, especially how we used to run Google Ads, say 10 years ago, all the way up to say 8 years ago when they started to implement Performance Max, was your shopping or search campaigns. You never really wanted to use your display or your YouTube or any of these other sort of brand awareness tools, just because they never really saw a direct return. With Performance Max and kind of adding all of that in, it's done an amazing job at showing us that those other platforms do play a really good role, but also because of the audience signals as well. There's so many more audience signals that you can choose with a Performance Max campaign. as opposed to any other sort of display campaign going to the standard audience sort of market. So yeah, no, that's definitely something to add, is that Performance Max is just kind of bringing all of that together exactly as you're saying, making it easy for the advertiser. It's no sort of like, picking and choosing as to which one works, which one doesn't. And letting Google, really make the decisions as to when someone should see an ad, how they should see an ad, and kind of driving that bottom of funnel traffic too.
Awesome. Thank you. So, and then right after this slide, I think we have a couple of examples of how some of the ads are going to be displayed, across the different inventory places on Google. So if we move on to the next slide here, we'll see, obviously, again, you can show your ads on shopping if you have a product feed. So if you have your inventory, you can be able to display those ads there. You can show on Gmail, you can show on the standard Google search, YouTube, across the board, you name it, this is your all-in-one. So now let's talk a little bit of how we got to the discovery side. Sorry, the demand gen side. So on the demand gen, on the flip side here, we're coming from what used to be discovery. Now, discovery had a very short-lived cycle really in itself. So discovery was an evolution to what Google had with display. They just had a couple of very select placements, which was just really the discovery feed. So Google was like, okay, well, how can we place some ads in this like environment? And then they figured, okay, well, we can do this kind of campaign. And so there was some feedback that advertisers provided, there was some feedback from agencies as well. And they decided to make a move over to demand generation. And I think they've done a pretty good job, actually. Quite like demand gen campaigns, really, as opposed to, at least from like an advanced standpoint. I know we're gonna get to that in a second, but I do see some really good opportunities within the demand gen side. So what's happened here is, again, from a history perspective, we're seeing this evolve from the discovery itself. And what you have is a little bit of reduced reach, at least in terms of inventory, right? So demand gen cannot run on search. So if you want to be on search, PMax as you go, or your search campaign, of course. So you're not going to be able to be there. And essentially the focus here is to create visual, right? It's very visual. And I think when we were talking, offline, Brent, I think you mentioned something along the lines of this kind of resembling some sort of an option for social media managers, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So demand gen, it's really Google's attempt at bringing a bit more of that social element to Google. Probably the biggest thing to mention is, engagement is a new currency. The way that people buy and make their decisions these days is based on how much attention can you grab from them, how memorable can your brand be. So when we look at a discovery campaign, even though it kind of sits in that top and middle funnel, it really does focus on the engagement side of things more than just the awareness and have you heard of this brand before. So adding in platforms like YouTube, where as opposed to discovery or display to just be still images, adding in your YouTube campaigns massively helps with that. 3 of the, I think it's 5 total platforms that discovery ads use, demand gen users, is going to be YouTube. And then also adding the creator side of things as well. Like that's a big one, is being able to do easier and better sort of creative testing. And that's where that whole social media element comes into it, is that's something that a social media manager at least would be much more sort of practice for. So I definitely think those two worlds are going to start coming together.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I do see one of the questions on here, and I think you can, if you press the next slide, there's actually going to be a little table that we're going to show here. And so Andy's asking, for example, if we think that PMax or demand gen could be, good for B2B and software as a service companies. And I think this question would probably come from the fact that we were talking about how PMax evolved from shopping. So just to clarify for the audience, right? So PMax, you can resemble shopping because you could very easily move a shopping campaign into a PMax and it will essentially work the same. You'll just get an expanded reach. But you are certainly able to use PMax for lead generation as well. You can very well do it. We do it in-house for a few different customers and things like that. So PMax or demand gen, they're both very much useful for both e-commerce or lead generation. It's just about how you do the setup, making sure that your tracking is right. And of course, just understand that also from a lead generation standpoint, you're going to have to be really careful with your search themes, kind of navigate a couple of things like that. And again, we'll talk about how you can optimize some of these. But yes, just to clarify, PMax is certainly not just for an e-commerce store, and you can very well work out of search themes and things like that. So we'll move on to the next one. Awesome. So this is a little bit, of course, the ads are going to be pretty similar because essentially the ads nowadays, really, if you want to think about it, they're not really tied to the campaign type. They're more tied to the placement in itself. So when you think or a demand gen ad look like, for that matter, is really where is it showing? And that's exactly how that's going to look. So think of how does the ad look on YouTube? How does the ad look on the discovery feed? How does the ad look on the search network? And regardless of the campaign type, a search ad is going to look the same way as a PMax for the most part. They're going to look exactly the same. So just keep that in mind that, you know, when you try to imagine or envision how your ads will place, it's really going to be down to the placement specifically.
Yeah. And one more thing to add with this as well is in regards to a display campaign, you're not really advertising on the display network with a demand gen campaign as well. You really are going to the high engagement platforms, which you'll see some stats later on as to exactly why they're such high engaging platforms. But that's just something to point out.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a great point, because in this case, with demand gen, we're talking about Google owned properties. And that's really kind of Google's selling point here with demand gen. It's like, if you do a display campaign, you can be on anyone, like, you know, again, the display network's technically, you know, Google, but it's not a Google owned property in itself. So like, there's a little control over. So if you want to think of brand safety, for example, you have so much more to worry about on brand safety with like display campaign that could easily show on any placement, like any mobile app game, or some suspicious sites or questionable sites, you know. So whereas at least with a demand gen, if you want to think of it from that standpoint, like, there's a little bit less to worry about. You can still show up on a weird YouTube video, I guess, but there's less concerns around that for sure. All right, so why don't we move on to the next slide here? All right, so this is obviously the question, right? I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. So should you focus on PMax or demand gen? And again, this slide pretty much talks about a little bit of the same thing that we discussed about the evolution of how we got to PMax in the first place. And that's essentially that. And this is the direction where I think things are going. And this is not insider information, by the way. This is just my educated guesses. I do believe that within a couple of years, like we'll be living in a world where there's no keywords, you know, and I think that's pretty much where things are going. And essentially with PMax, that's a little bit of what you have. You have a preview of what our campaign is going to look like by creating a campaign that is keyword less. And obviously now you have keyword themes. And let me ask you this, Brent, you know, do you still see campaigns on PMax without the keyword themes and just doing targeting generally? Or do you see most everyone now has their keyword theme set up?
Yeah, definitely keyword themes. You know, if it's an older Performance Max campaign, maybe every once in a while you won't, but always see search themes. Like that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that one. So and so we'll go into the next slide because I think we have a slide here upcoming in regards to some of the benefits of essentially the way that Google is going to work and maximize your reach. And so these two campaigns are essentially the flagship for Google on the AI standpoint, right? So you'll be able to have Google kind of match you to the right person. And the key thing to consider here is there's two components, obviously. So there's the AI component to that, but also there is a component of what signals are you feeding Google's AI to be able to kind of figure out where to advertise correctly. And so the message here, in my opinion, is that the input that we provide in regards to targeting options, in regards to customer data that we provide, it's really what's going to help you really harness that performance benefit. Because if you just take advantage of the campaign by creating it and you keep the targeting relatively broad, you're very likely going to see a lot of traffic coming through. That's not really going to give you that bang for your buck. So I'm not sure if you have anything to add into this one in particular.
More so just like to the disclaimer down the bottom, I think that's a really good one. With Performance Max, it obviously goes toward the bottom of the funnel. Your demand gen goes towards your mid and upper. Generative AI is going to be a big game changer for marketers, but at the end of the day, humans know humans. Machine learning and AI is going to be able to curate data and make a bit more decision about when someone's likely to buy based on patterns and cycles. But at the end of the day, it really does take that human input to understand, why does a human want to buy this product, or why does a human need this service, X, Y, Z. So I think we're going to see some really harmonious sort of balances between that, at least for now.
Yeah, I like your, at least for now.
At least for now. At least for now.
Let's head over to the next slide here. So these are obviously some important notes. 91% of consumers who discover new products or brands on Google feeds took an action immediately. And I'm gonna say this very, very honestly. Every time I open Gmail, I am so OCD about keeping my inbox in zero that, especially on my personal email, like sometimes I'll just see like the unread and I think it's an email, and then I'll click on it and it's like, that happens to me all the time. But these are just obviously some important statistics around the fact that not everybody is searching for your product or service. That's the truth. Not everybody is searching for your product and service, and that doesn't mean that you cannot create a meaningful interaction to drive that attention back. So that's the great, that's really what demand gen is called out, because it's about doing that, and we'll talk about how that can then translate into some results and how you can measure results. But essentially what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create attraction. We're trying to create attention, and you can do so in these placements that we have available to us, the Gmail, the Explore page. These are the times where people are in a mode where they are open to engagement. They're open to creativeness. They're open to see, and this is a perfect way to engage with them. So there's definitely a lot of potential here available.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. So this is a little bit of what we spoke about earlier, right? So different placements, PMax is your all-in-one. It's going to encompass absolutely everything within the Google umbrella. Whereas with demand gen, you're going to be able to do a little bit less. So we have a couple of interesting questions, and I wanted to save them for this slide because I think this is a great way to kind of tackle a couple of these questions. So for example, here's an interesting question from Benjamin, and that is, what's a better idea for a new brand if you want to do awareness? Would you want to do a YouTube in a display, or would you just do a demand gen out of the box? And I think that it's an interesting question, because the question here is going to be, where are your users going to be? For the most part, it's trying to understand a little bit about your audience. But essentially, depending on the budget you have available, I actually like starting out with a demand gen campaign right out of the gate if you have the budgets to do so. And I don't think you necessarily need the YouTube campaign unless you're going to be spending a good chunk of money, or you have premium placements that you want to do. So for example, if there's specific channels that you want to pick out, you might want to do that YouTube campaign separately. But if you're just starting out and you want to try out a little bit of performance to answer that question, that's how I would tackle that. I'm not sure if you feel the same, Brent.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think every new campaign, it always comes down to the budget, right? If you have the budget, demand gen is going to work. It's as simple as that. But if you are starting a bit more conservative, then yeah, I might start with just a YouTube, or even going towards like your display remarketing, and try and feed a bit more of that engagement data and your software conversions. That's probably the biggest one I wanted to point out with the optimization point here. Is Performance Max really does rely on data. Therefore, the more conversion data you have, the better Performance Max goes. Same sort of thing with demand gen. So it does come down to, if you can send so many people to your website, Google's going to start sending who's spending more time on your website. But if you need to be really niche with your target from get-go, starting with a budget of say less than $100 a day or something like that, I definitely wouldn't go towards a demand gen. But there's definitely a really good sort of, there's a lot of merit in saying start with demand gen for your engagement campaigns.
Good. And I think one important thing that people are going to ask quite a bit here is like, which one should I pick, this and that? Okay, so we're going to get to that in a second, but if you look at just from this slide, you might be like, okay, well, if I want to just do everything, I might just want to stick to PMax, because PMax is going to have the same placements as my demand gen. So like, why on earth would I pick a demand gen? Really? I mean, you would maybe make that or reach that conclusion. And one thing that I think is important to mention within that is, it's all about, where do you want to be and what objectives do you have? And one of the caveats of Performance Max, which again, I think we can cover that within our very practical tips, but one of the things that you'll find with Performance Max is you can't quite pick the networks where you want to be. you can't quite pick a certain budget. It's like, I want this much budget to go to video, or this much budget to go, to the discovery feeds. So if you have that necessity to be able to spend this much on just demand generation and presence and awareness, then demand generation campaign can shine. Whereas your PMax is a little bit more of that, again, that all-in-one, that's going to be able to create those that performance. So this is a great kind of way to break out the objectives that you can target. Again, if you want brand awareness, you want to create interest, whereas on PMax, you want to create the specific actions, and you want to create some conversions. So I have an interesting question for you, Brent. It's not in the Q&A, but it's a question that I have for you, and that is, what are some examples of conversion actions you see with demand gen?
Yeah, with demand gen, probably the biggest thing I always look at is your website engagement metrics. So these are things that you can import from Google Analytics 4 into your Google Ad account. I'm always looking to see how long is someone spending on the page and how often they're looking around. That really helps massively when it comes to determining how successful is my demand gen campaign. If I get conversions coming through, like, that's fantastic. But my main sort of focus is how engaged are they when they get to my page. So that's probably the biggest one. And then, of course, with YouTube, being in demand gen, you can still get a lot of watch rates, how long are people watching for, and a lot of those sort of creative testings as well. But the main thing I'm looking at in regards to, I guess, conversion actions would be more soft conversions. If they get on the website or landing page and they download that ebook or a newsletter or something like that, where it's a half commitment, but it's a little bit easier, they are definitely the sort of goals that I'm looking for with demand gen.
I love that. And I think that's an important distinction to make, right? I see quite often, I don't know if you see this as well, but I audit accounts all the time. And I see the conversion actions, and they'll have the same conversion actions for the PMax that they do for the demand gen. So like I'll see a prospect that's coming through and they have 3 different campaign types, and they'll have the same conversions across the board. And it's like, this is where your segmentation is going to come into play. And it's going to be so important towards your optimization and the way that you perceive performance. So I think absolutely great point. So I think we have a next slide that's actually pretty interesting as well in regards to like fit and so recapping. So in terms of what is your objective? So if your objective is to drive an actual result or action, a form fill, a phone call. You want, if you're in the e-commerce world, you want to create a purchase. If you're for the person that asks us about software as a service, if you're trying to create that registration, that free trial sign up, this is a great way to do that with PMax. And you're trying to create those immediate conversions. And for the manager, on the flip side to that is obviously a little bit more of that, kind of top level. And I actually have one of the tips to do that, and that is, for example, if you're a software as a service, which is a perfect example. Let's say you're brand new to the business. You're trying to create a lot of this buzz around your new software, and maybe you're not very known within that niche. There's a lot of other competitors and not you. So this is demand is a great way to make sure that you can create some of that initial branding that will then translate into a lot more performance on search. So it's connected. So it's just a great way to kind of see it from that perspective. And so I think that the next slide kind of illustrates a little bit of how that can be portrayed. But before we move on to the next one, just wanted to see if there's anything here that you'd like to add.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully explained. I think that we go through this in a bit more detail in the later slides when it comes to what stage of the funnel has that all broken down. But yeah, with your Performance Max campaigns versus your demand gen, the way I like to look at it is demand gen is considered like a school of fish. Demand gen is like the dolphin that kind of rounds up all the fish. They kind of keep them all in this tight confined area, and then the Performance Max campaign is like a net that scoops them all up. So demand gen creates that interest. It creates that sort of tight knit of to a group of highly engaged users, and then your Performance Max campaign is that sort of call to action, like come in, buy now, get them when the time's right, and kind of completing that purchase as well, or lead generation, or whatever the goal is.
Awesome. So I think on this slide in particular, for example, we have something here where we're talking about a little bit of that top of the funnel and kind of that understanding of where you are and how you create that let's say brand loyalty. So obviously brand loyalty is a little bit too far ahead, but essentially, how do you turn somebody that has never heard of your brand
Yeah.
and then eventually kind of get there. So can we go back to the slide view?
To the previous one.
Awesome stuff. So on this particular one, I think we're good to go. I think we've kind of covered it very well in regards to, you know, just kind of how the funnel was. So we're going to kind of move forward here. So what are some of the things that are new? There's been some recent changes. Search Teams was introduced, you know, quite recently. So now we have the ability to kind of add our keyword, right? To as close as possible to what you can call that. One thing that I also wanted to mention here that it's not really, for a lot of people, it's not really evident, but also within PMax, you do have the ability to do negative keywords. There's just, it's one of those obscure settings. So you can either quick tip, so you can go to the account settings, guys, and on the account settings you can do some account level negatives. That's one option if you're just running PMax. But of course, if you're running some search campaigns, that's going to maybe be a little weird. And then the other option you have is you can contact support, and they can add a negative keyword list and apply it to the PMax campaign. And you know, it can be empty to get started. You just need it to be applied, and then after that, all you need to do is kind of start adding a negative keyword. So quick tip for those of you guys that are not doing negative keywords on your PMax. And any of these like particular features, you know, come to be of your interest, Brent, you know, that you use all the time, or that you're starting to recommend to people?
Yeah, look, the negatives are probably the biggest one. Search themes is not as new, but that definitely does play a pretty good role in sort of shaping the search term traffic that comes through for Performance Max. But yeah, looking at demand gen here, you kind of compared the two as like PMax is having a few new things, whereas demand gen is like, boom, these like, you know, a lot of new options here. You've got, you know, max clicks is new bidding options. You've got all your A/B testing. You've got images and videos put together as a sort of consolidated ad group or campaign type. So yeah, there's a lot of new things with demand gen that we're currently testing.
I agree with that. And one thing that I think is not really sort of listed here, but one of the things that it's really important within the PMax is that you now have the ability to do the search terms, so to speak, right? So that wasn't really there before. Scripts were a big thing for everything to do with, you know, with PMax reporting. So I think that was something that was added kind of recently. So we have a quick request to go back maybe 2 slides, Brent. So if we could just go back to the funnel strategy here. And so essentially, kind of recapping here for those of you guys that weren't able to see the full slide or in full screen, it's obviously you want to think of where your buyers are within a certain funnel, and you know, kind of how much do they know about the brand? Is your brand well known? If it is, you could probably continue to invest there. But if you know, if it's not, this is a great opportunity for you to start doing that if you haven't. And again, you want to be able to create that intent afterwards, because in short, demand generation will help fuel additional search traffic afterwards, because people are now aware of your brand and what you do, how you can supply value. Make sure your copy reflects that. And that's actually an interesting tip, by the way, pro tip. Make sure your copy for your demand gen is not truly focused on direct action, but more so on this component about what your brand is. And your CTAs should be softer CTAs. So that's a quick pro tip. So yeah, I think we can get back on track here and move, because want to make sure we have some time for questions towards the end. So this is an interesting slide in regards to tracking and data. And we had a slide earlier, right, about the best way to harness the performance of AI is by feeding it enough data. And you don't want it to make conclusions based on inaccurate information or incomplete information. So make sure you take advantage of your audience signals. And you know, one thing that I've seen quite a bit is there's a few options within the audience signals that you can pick. And sometimes people get a little bit confused around that. So do you have any interesting tips that you can share in regards to choosing audience signals? What do you go to audience signals, Brent? And you know, what can you tell us here?
Yeah, awesome. So my sort of best practices, I'll always start with your data, which is all your user provided data, your converters. So the highest quality data always. So if I don't have any conversions in the account, or I'm just not really happy with the amount, or you know, just there's some reason I can't use all converters, then I'll start using like your 30 days website visitors, or people that have engaged in software actions, such as like add to carts. But of course, the main sort of one would be anyone that's converted. The other one would be like your engaged and your affinity audiences. Don't go too crazy with your audiences. Try and be as specific as you can, because Performance Max will go outside of that scope of audiences that you select. I believe demand gen is relatively similar. Depends on how you have it set up as well. So be very specific with the audiences that you want. To kind of imagine that whatever audience you add, kind of double that is where you're more likely going to be sitting in terms of audiences. So the more specific, the better. But it's exactly the same with the tracking and data. It's probably the biggest thing that we as marketers can do to be able to assist AI. It's not necessarily about, how many awesome creators can we add these days. There's definitely a balance of that, but there's a lot of AI generated content these days that, is amazing. A lot of it comes down to how much first-party data are you feeding straight back towards Google, because that's going to help Google understand a lot more about your use than anything.
Yeah, great stuff. And I have a quick question for you there also. And I know we're probably going to tackle a couple of these afterwards, but when it comes to the segments that you're going to use, right, and some of the audiences you're going to pick, if you were running demand gen and you were running PMax at the same time, do you find that you'll have the same audience segments, or are you going to, have the task of picking separate audiences so you don't have that overlap?
And that's a tricky one to answer as well, because again, when it's going to sort of expand outside of, there's going to be some sort of overlap with your audiences, 100%. I think I'd like to say that I rely more on the actual goals of, demand gen is going to be chasing more engagement. So if I have the same audience, that's okay. There's not really much of an overlap there. Whereas Performance Max is going to be focusing primarily on like your search engines, so your shopping and your search, but also like your display campaigns as well to really try and bring that conversion in. So I think it's the same audience, just at a different buying cycle or stage in the buying cycle.
Awesome, thank you. And we have a question from the audience here, by the way. And it's actually ties in pretty nicely with this slide in regards to the soft conversions that we have here. So we have a question from Jorge, and that is, Brent, when you track on demand gen, like, do you find yourself only tracking micro conversions, meaning these like soft conversions? So like your newsletters, your ebook downloads, or your downloadable content. Obviously, that's a little bit more again at the top of that funnel. So are those going to be your primary conversions for demand gen, or are those still secondary even on a demand gen?
Yeah, I'll usually make them primary. I'll set all of your bigger ones as a secondary, but if I'm starting to notice that my usual primary, like my purchases or lead generation is up around the 30 conversions, something like that a month, something consistent, then I might consider swapping it over as a primary action. But yeah, again, the whole idea of demand gen, exactly as you said that, Daniel, is that it's a top of funnel campaign. I don't want to put too much pressure on trying to generate bottom of funnel sales. That's what my Performance Max campaign's for.
Yeah, phenomenal. Thank you so much. So let's continue with the slides here. All right, this is probably the best part. Let's talk about some best practices. So we obviously decided to include search here because it's still a question, right? So when you talk about demand gen versus PMax, the biggest differentiation, in my opinion, is going to be like, are you trying to drive some direct action or not? And that to me kind of is the sort of the gist of it, right? And then when it is about direct action, then you're going to kind of get into this little game of, okay, well, do I want to do a PMax or do I want to do a search? But that's going to be maybe a question for a different day. But again, this is just a little table to kind of illustrate a little bit of how these three campaign types are going to be differentiated. What are some of the recommendations in regards to bidding that you might want to do? And I think on the demand gen side here, I think we're also sort of missing the fact that you are also able to bid for clicks. So that was actually part of the release within demand gen. So you now have maximized clicks. And actually, I'm happy that it's there, because in my opinion, I almost feel like, especially to begin with, you might want to do that one. And I see quite a bit that, and I'm not sure if you kind of do this also with your clients. It's like maybe they don't have a lot of the secondary actions set up on tracking. So there's a bit of work first to do to like audit within their website to say, okay, well, what are some of these soft conversions that we can track? Okay, I know, I get it. You want to do all of this branding, but they're just tracking form submissions. Okay, so no, wait a second. Let's take a step back. What are some of the secondary things that we can do within your website that we can track? And that way we can still be able to feed something into the AI algorithm and try to drive up performance as opposed to just clicks. But I do find that sometimes you might have to start with that, depending on kind of what the setup might be. And what are some of the options that you have? I would say that's an interesting point here. But regarding the slide specifically, as you guys can see, it's mostly going to be okay. Well, do you want to be everywhere? Okay, PMax is probably a good one. But again, also try to think about what results are you trying to drive, and I think that's ultimately kind of your North Star. It's like, what results are you trying to create? And then based on that, you might want to pick that, and then also be mindful of your budget. So where's your budget at? And again, if you're an end client, if you're the business owner, you obviously understand your priorities better. But if you're an agency or you're an account manager, you really want to be very clear about what are the expectations of your client. What are they going to expect conversions, like actual calls from your demand gen? Like, because if they are, then they're in for a different treat, right? And again, the idea is to still influence performance on your other campaign types, but don't be fooled by thinking that obviously you're going to see some direct action from that. So how do you feel about some of these differentiations?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Going to the max clicks with your demand gen, that is definitely a newer feature. I've done a bit of testing with that, and every account is very different, exactly as you're saying. With your secondary or your softer conversions, if you don't have those set up or you just don't have enough data, then max clicks is always a good way to start. And then I'll do a lot of optimizations towards how long are people, spending on the page. Is this the right sort of, ad for XYZ? But as soon as I start getting those, softer conversions coming through, I definitely want to go towards your maximized conversions, just because Google's going to take a bit more or pay a bit more attention towards quality audiences as opposed to more impulsive audiences, which is definitely the main sort of goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we want to move forward here, just a little bit, because we still have to get into some of the case studies, and I could talk forever, by the way. Like I say that all the time. One thing that I think is interesting here is, again, within the PMax side is, just want to make sure everyone that the more conversion data that you can kind of feed in, the better. And I'm not saying to use it as primary. That's not the point. Yeah, but just so that you're able to track it, right? That's kind of the more important part to that. So if you do a lead gen, for those of you guys that were asking about lead generation or software as a service, make sure, this isn't really a webinar for tracking, but just make sure that you are able to feed back how those, if for example, if you have free trials, make sure you have some offline conversion set up so that you can kind of track that, whether or not that actually turned into a subscription that was paid. If you're a lead generation business and maybe you have a retail store, don't forget to report and set up your store visit conversions and things like this. And again, that's going to help facilitate how the campaigns are going to perform. And I actually feel like this is actually a question that I had for you, Brent, on this particular slide is, how often do you see PMax running as a standalone versus running as an add-on to something else that you already have, whether that is as an add-on to an existing search or as an add-on to, let's say, as we were discussing, as a demand campaign?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I have seen it before where there's just one Performance Max campaign or just a series of a couple of different Performance Max campaigns. Again, I think that is really important to highlight that your Performance Max campaigns rely on fresh, good quality data. It is purely focused on just trying to get as many conversions as humanly possible, hence Performance Max being the name of it. So therefore, if you're not giving it new sort of fresh data from your search campaigns or other shopping campaigns, if you set up correctly, you're really putting Performance Max behind the eight ball in regards to trying to find new people. So what we'll generally find is it starts to remarket old customers. Even if you exclude some of the old customers, there's still a bit of leakage in that as well. So or just target straight towards brand terms. So we definitely find that the best sort of practice would be no more than about 50% of your budget should go towards Performance Max. And then under the other 50% should be split up between search or shopping campaigns or whatever else you're targeting as well.
Yeah, good stuff. So I think we are running a little out of time here, so we're going to move into some of the kind of practical tips. I think we can skip a couple of these and just kind of jump into, for example, I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about a case study that you have here. I think we have a case study from an account of yours a little bit towards the end there, and obviously you are a guest, so I want to make sure you get to tell us a little bit about the story and how you implemented that. We have a couple of case studies from White Shirt here, but for the most part, really the way that to keep it pretty simple is we were obviously running search at the time, and by implementing PMax, This actually really helped us specifically with this client because the way that their search keywords were set up, they were very specific. They're about peanut butter nationwide. So imagine trying to do keywords for that. It's a little funky. So so we were able to do PMax in addition to doing shopping, and we were able to drive up some really good cost per conversion. But again, I think that you can see here from just the way that the conversions we're able to see here, and again, we were tracking a couple of different things within here, and just keep in mind obviously that this is purchases plus a couple of other meaningful actions, but PMax was really helpful here to make sure that we had a lot of creatives going on, and could continue to drive performance within that regards. But I want to hear a little bit more about your case study, Brent, and maybe you can tell us a little bit. Let me see. Well, actually, I don't think we have one here. Did we not? Sorry.
Got one on the side here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, I missed the logo there on the top left. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about this one?
Yeah, so this one's really exciting. So this is actually a building client of ours, and between 19th of December up until I believe it was last week, that's what this data is showing. So impressions, we had 2.8 million impressions, which is awesome. We spent $100,000. Just keeping in mind that only went up 6%, but we had 3,368 conversions, which went up 30%, and then the cost per conversion came down 18% at $30. Per conversion. And what's really cool about this is when we introduced the demand gen campaign. So it was introduced on the 19th of December, and then immediately we started noticing that we're converting better, we're converting cheaper, we're converting more. It's less friction in that conversion path. And the one really cool thing to mention here as well is of that $100,000 cost between then to now, only 4,000 of that has gone towards demand gen. So it really is a testament to show that you don't need a crazy big budget for it, but it definitely does help you just kind of warm up those leads when they're not already actively searching for you and just relying on your search and sometimes Performance Max campaigns.
It's a pretty good one to definitely do a little bit of that retargeting, 100%. Especially if you have a way to feed in your previous customers or your previous converters and things along those lines. I think it's a great way to do that. I have a quick question for you on this one. So, were you running what other campaign types were you running the demand gen along with?
A fair bit of everything. So there's a lot of search campaigns. There are a few Performance Max campaigns. And then we have some app campaigns as well. So there's a fair bit of everything else. I think it comes to a total of about 20 campaigns. So yeah, a bit of everything.
Awesome. So let's move into the Q&A section, because I think that's what everybody wants to kind of go over. And I think it's been phenomenal to talk about a couple of these things. And I mentioned this in one of my LinkedIn posts. I said, this is one of those where you could really talk forever, and you could have multiple series or a more extended session. So kind of one couple of questions here. So from Bamdot, he's asking, could we have a PMax and shopping for the same feed as parallel campaigns? Yes, you can. Not really a big deal. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I would encourage is if you're coming from shopping and you want to try PMax, then do it as an experiment. Try to run a PMax. And then do 50-50. So, don't decrease altogether. It's like, don't pause your shopping and do the PMax only, kind of slowly migrate into that so that you can give that a go. And essentially what you'll find is that, of course, be mindful of this. So shopping and PMax are completely different things. Yeah. The PMax can take advantage of your product feed, and it will have placements in the shopping, searches. But it will also show up everywhere else. So it will also show on the display network. It will also show on Gmail. It will also show everywhere else. So if you just understand that by doing that switch, you'll have more exposure. But at the same time, you also need to keep a better eye on it because again, it's just different segments. So I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that answer.
No, I think that's perfect. I think it really comes down to campaign or account structure as well when you're looking at your Performance Max and your shopping campaigns. If you're running all products for both of these all together, then you're going to start kind of mashing all that data together, and it's going to be a little bit skewed and all over the place. What I like to do is with your Performance Max campaigns, include all of your products in that, any products that consistently convert from that. So your what we call hero products, separate that into its own shopping campaign, but put a high priority on this. So there's a setting within the campaign settings where you can change the campaign priority, turn that to high, and then Google's going to prioritize this campaign and this product as opposed to the Performance Max product. And then from there, you can essentially start taking a little bit of control with your shopping campaigns. This is your hero products, which mean they get more conversions than anything. You can consider switching them off in your Performance Max campaigns, and then we start forcing spend from those ones that don't get as much sort of search volume. And then same sort of process, add them in, sort of more spend towards the lower spending products, and then add them into the high, hero shopping campaign.
Thank you very much, Brent. I think that's a great answer. I think we have two questions that are very similar here from an earlier on attendee earlier in the session, and from Ashley now, and that is, so what's a good budget to start with? And I think you pointed this out, Brent. So you were mentioning that your actual spend on your case study wasn't really that significant in regards to in comparison to the rest. So what do you think it's a minimal ballpark that if you were pitching this to a client that you would say, hey, why don't you give me this amount? Let me show you what we could do with that.
Yeah, perfect. First thing I'd say to the client is, are we getting consistent conversions already? If we are, fantastic. Let's go towards, if they're spending, say, $10,000 a month, let's add another $2,000 a month on top of that. So I usually go for about 20% more. However, if they're spending about $30,000 a month, then I'm going to go for something a bit more towards the $6,000 a month. So it's almost like this incremental, the more you're spending and you're already getting conversions, the more you want to spend on that. However, if we're spending, say less than $3,000 a month, I generally won't recommend it much at all. I would say say $10 a day, like $300 a month. So something very small. So yeah, it really does come down to the account. But the way I sort of look at it is, if your spend goes up, so spend's going up this way, then the demand gen sort of budget can go a little bit higher and upwards that way. Which is always just going to help with sort of feeding, warmer people down to the bottom of funnel campaigns.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Brent. And one thing that I would mention is specifically for those clients that don't really have a lot of money to spend, or at least they haven't really committed fully to Google Ads or PPC in general, and they're maybe spending within that range of sub 3,000. I would say the only use case in which I would see that demand gen would probably fit right in, regardless of whether or not they're getting a whole bunch of conversions, is if, for example, they're within either a niche industry or if they're a player that their product is not very well known, or their brand is not very well known, and you're trying to make sure that you can create some traction from that. Let me give you an example. So again, let's say that you're selling a product and this is a very unique solution, but there's not really a whole lot of that within the market. And so what do? Do you target competitors on the search terms? You could. That's one way to do it, but that's also pretty expensive, and it will cost you some money to target competitors. On the flip side to that, you can maybe try to do search keywords for let's say similar product categories. But again, I think in that case where your product's not very well known or your brand's not very well known, a demand is actually kind of a nice little investment that you can do to start generating some of that traction. And what I like to do as a pro tip also is if you have Search Console configured, keep an eye out on your branded terms. So for example, you can see how much growth you have on organic traffic over a period of time by monitoring, because ideally, if you have a lot more exposure on the demand gen side, that should hopefully translate into an uplift and that's why Google has the brand lift study, but not everybody has the time to do that, one of those, or the ability or the budget to do one of those. So Search Console is, kind of monitoring that organic traffic towards your brand is kind of a nice little free way to do that. So that's it. That's what I would say. So we have another question in regards to, and I like this one actually, which is, so on the creative specifically, right? And I think I touched on this. What are some of your tips and how do you normally approach the messaging and differentiating your messaging and your headlines and your descriptions and even your image and video copy, which is very important when you're differentiating between demand gen and PMax?
Yeah, perfect. So demand gen, I'm purely focused on what's the problem this, say, product or service is solving. In most cases, I'll be running demand gen for products. So going back to that niche example actually is perfect. Is generally speaking, if you have a niche product, it means that it operates in a way that's slightly different. It's kind of something that solves a problem that people don't even know that they already have. So therefore, using content for that is going to be a bit more showing off the product. How does it work? How does it sort of fit into your day-to-day life, or what's the how's it going to essentially change your life? So demand gen would be really good for that, and then for Performance Max to be more so focused on the deals that you've got going on, whether it's like a 2-for-1 or something like that, or whether it's using more like social proof, like these guys are doing it, therefore you guys should too. Is purely focused on what are the selling points of this product in regards to how do I get you to buy it tomorrow. So demand gen, more so focusing on what is the product, how does it help you, and then for your Performance Max, it's going to be a bit more about how do I get you to buy this as soon as possible, basically. And most of the time it comes down to a sale, or it comes down to just some sort of offering. No one else is doing it this quality, or something like that, and sort of demonstrating why you're different to anyone else that already has this niche product, if there is anyone else.
That's a phenomenal suggestion, and I would definitely approach it. What was that?
Good delay. So I was going to say with headlines, it's very similar as well. So headlines is going to be a bit more focusing towards, and demand gen is just almost no call to action at all. It's just a bit more about check us out, check out why people love us, etc. And then Performance Max is going to be a lot more direct. Buy now, selling out, free shipping, whatever it is that's going to help them convert.
Yep, and I think it's all connected, right, Brent? So
yep.
You do the headlines, you do the video in a bit of a softer way, and that translates and echoes very well with the landing page that you have, and how the action that you want them to take is to sign up for the newsletter to get more information about the business, or it's like, hey, get this white paper, or learn more about us by subscribing to the a YouTube page, and things like that. So it's all really much connected within that, and that also aligns with the way that you're going to set expectations with clients about how that is going to perform. So I think it's an important point within that. And I think, let me see if we can fit one in. So somebody asked about a clarification on your hero products. So they're asking if would the hero products be in their own campaign or asset group, and I guess really kind of what you meant is a hero product would probably be on the shopping campaign. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So I want to have a bit more control with these products. To define a hero product, it's something that sells well and has good margins. So I'm actually profiting from this product as well. I'm not spending too much to be able to get the conversion. So let's just say product is $30 goes towards your margin. So there's 60% profit margin or whatever it might be. That's going to, and then I'm paying less than 3 times to get that conversion. Therefore, that's a break even to okay product. So if I'm getting like an 8 times ROAS on that product, then fantastic. It's very profitable for me. Am I selling a fair few of these products? Yes, I definitely am. Great, that goes into its own hero campaign. Would I keep it in say a different asset group within the same Performance Max campaign? Generally not, just because I'm not going to give the other products more chance to sell as well. So by separating it into its own shopping campaign and then eventually turning it off in the Performance Max campaign, I'm telling Performance Max to focus on the other products to see what else can potentially be added to that hero campaign too.
Thank you very much. And I know we had a couple of other questions, guys. Thank you so much for kind of being with us today. But we ran out of time, and so if you guys have additional questions, please reach out to us. You can reach out to marketing@whitetrickmedia.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn and Daniel Alvarado, or you can look up Brent. He shares content very often and very good content as well. So make sure you give him a follow. And again, thank you everyone so much. Brent, any final words that you want to share with us today?
Look, thanks for having me here. This has been awesome to go through and also dig a little bit deeper in demand gen. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I can see that putting both of our sort of knowledge together on this one has been absolutely awesome. So thanks for having me here.
All right, I think with that, we are going to close it then, guys. Thank you once again so much. Make sure that you follow us on LinkedIn, on different social media. We will be sharing the recording and the slides as well via email. And stay tuned and have yourself a lovely week. Thank you and bye-bye.